A very warm welcome to all those classical musicians out there who want to grow and expand a creative lifestyle both on and off stage. My name is Karin Bonelli. I'm flutist at the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, a passionate explorer and seeker in musical and personal growth, and founder of Penthesilea Academy, the most innovative masterclass designed for audition preparation. This podcast is for you if you're searching for new ideas to elevate the productivity of your musical practice and your level of focus and expression on stage. But that's not all. In each episode, you will find bits and pieces to integrate into your everyday life, as well as new perspectives and insights by our experienced and passionate team and guests. Music is not a job. It is a way of living. My name is Karin Bonelli, and this is Penthesilea On Air. Veronika Jana Lubert is the new head coach for mental training and psychological coaching at Penthesilea Academy. She studied the violin in Austria and Australia, all while continuing her studies in psychology at the universities of Vienna and Melbourne. Today, she's working with various approaches to help musicians through performance coaching and guiding them through the challenges of living a balanced and fulfilled life while working in this high-performance field of classical music. As an active researcher in the field of music and sports psychology, she's the author of numerous publications, as well as recipient of many honors and awards in her field. Today, she still pursues her passion for her instrument in different orchestras in Vienna, while her main focus is on coaching musicians in her own private practice, giving workshops and lectures at performing arts institutions, while being part of the Division of Sports Psychology at the University of Vienna and continuing her research. Her multifaceted approach is also appreciated in various musical institutions and masterclasses who started to work with Veronika on a regular basis, bringing more and more awareness to the general mental health of classical musicians. Today, we discuss the big questions of what it takes to bring our best self on stage, where we should place our focus during a performance, and what it takes to live a mentally balanced life as a musician. Hi, Veronika, and welcome to Penthesilea On Air podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Karin. Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Veronika, you studied the violin and psychology. At what point and why did you then also explore the field of psychology? Was it just to find solution for your own performance, or was it just a general interest?
Well, I've had an interest in psychology for a very long time. And I actually started studying officially simultaneously. So that was in 2012. I studied both violin and psychology. And then around 2016, I got a good insight into the orchestral life. And I think I got a bit tired of the touring, of the rehearsing, the practice. My body was tired and I didn't really have the tools to recover, to relax when I needed to. And that actually led to me kind of losing my love for the music. I remember sitting in the big symphony orchestra playing a Mahler symphony and not really feeling anything anymore. And that was kind of shocking for me. I really wanted to keep feeling the emotions and enjoying the music. And so I think it was around that time that I really pursued the thought of, okay, I would like to be a professional psychologist as well. So then I pursued the master's studies. And I would say it was never really a decision to just do one or the other. I've always been doing both. And I couldn't imagine my life without music, without playing the violin.
Amazing. And did you then find your way back to this passion, to the feeling, to the music?
I did. Yeah.
How
thankfully.
So? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think I took a step back. I somehow released of this pressure of having to make money with playing the violin, and just finding more autonomy in my professional field. So I found a new teacher. I did take auditions again, but I made sure that it was always my conscious decision what I wanted to do, what I wanted to play, with whom I wanted to play, and how much. And if I noticed that it was too much, then I would take a break. So, of course, I had quite a bit of freedom because I had my other path. But I think for me, it was the right way to always balance between my different interests and my different talents as well.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds quite freeing and like a luxury for something like for somebody like
Definitely.
me, because of course I love my job, but the thing that is most challenging is that even if you don't feel like it at all, you're just in this constant schedule and you can't escape. You just have to deliver every day. And this, of course, is a great challenge, but it can be, how do you say it? Yeah, sometimes it doesn't feel free. You just have to function. So what advice would you give someone who is like really stuck in this, how do you say that in English? Hamster wheel? Is there a word like this in English as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep asking yourself why you're doing it, and then finding the moments and the aspects that give you joy in everyday life as well. So without knowing why you're doing it, or maybe for whom you're playing, it's very difficult to stick to a schedule at some point, I think. So I've met people who've been doing fine for many years and then reach a point where they just start questioning why they're doing this. And so having your own personal why and then having your vision, I think, is really important. And then looking for the different aspects of making music, of being together with your ensemble, with the people you work with, and understanding what is it, why am I doing this, what gives me the joy, is the most important thing. And then, of course, also making sure that you find some time, even if it's just a couple of minutes in your very busy schedule, for yourself, so that you can recover and relax every now and then.
So the why as the main driver for your motivation.
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps also thinking about what makes your identity. So I think as a musician, as an artist, you're very strongly connected to what you're doing artistically, but also understanding what makes your personality and all the different aspects of life that just form your identity. So sometimes it can be valuable to find other things to do that also give meaning in your life. I know that this is difficult when you have a very busy schedule, but even if it's some small interest or reading about something, I think that can be useful.
Beautiful. So one of the main motivators to create Penthesilea Academy, where you will be joining this year for the first time, for me was that I found it unfair that sports people nowadays, they already have this big support system. They have support in every layer, physical, mental, emotional, throughout their careers. And we as musicians, when we leave the university, basically it's over, if the university provides the kind of support at all. So a lot of your research and your practical work has roots in sports psychology. So that's why I wanted to ask you, what are the most common threads that you see that unite those two professional groups, sports people
I
and
think,
musicians?
yeah, I think the first is certainly their hard work that they put in every day. So the hard training, the practice, this continuous desire to improve and also to maintain a very, very high level in your skills. And then certainly having to perform under pressure. So in difficult circumstances, in different environments, for an audience, maybe with a huge outcome that is important to you or people around you. And then it's also something about the skills themselves, like having to memorize like different formations or movements that of course become automatic over time, but you have to retrieve them in specific situations. And I think that is also common for both music and sports. Then, of course, also dealing with pain and injury is also something that both of these groups have to deal with. And finding a way to be motivated on a daily basis. So I think there are quite a few aspects that unite these two groups, but then there are, of course, also differences.
Yeah, I'm also interested in those because, of course, the everyday life is, as you said, it's an everyday life of a high performer. Maybe the challenges are quite similar, but what are the big differences in the mindset, for example? Do you see a big difference there?
In the mindset, I think what is really distinct is the way performance or good performance is being defined and evaluated. So what makes a good performance is, I think, in most fields in sport, fairly straightforward. But in music, it can be very difficult to define what a good performance is and also how to evaluate when you performed well or not. And I think this desire to just communicate an emotion or a story or a character is rather unique in music and usually not part of the athletic mindset. So in that regard, I think musicians differ quite strongly from athletes. Of course, musicians also need to think about their technique, about accuracy, about precision. It's sometimes a lot about reaction, especially when you play together with other people. But I think the artistic aspect and this kind of communicative and emotional aspect is really important in music and quite distinct from sports.
And why do you think is it that there's still a lack of this support in our educational systems at music universities and so on?
Well, I think things are changing. So I think now most universities offer like one workshop per per degree program on mental training, or at least audition and competition preparation. Sometimes they do call it musician psychology. So I think there's a growing awareness for the importance of this, like of the psychological and mental support for musicians. But part of it, I think, is just that maybe it's difficult to show the direct impact right away. So the direct advantage, I think we still need to work a lot to make that obvious, like what a strong advantage it is to be mentally prepared, to have tools for self-regulation, so that that also translates into your musical performance. And another aspect, I think, is also financial. And we know as musicians, we have very limited resources, time-wise as well. So quite often I just hear, oh, you need the time to practice. We don't have the time to even talk about mental aspects.
And what do you tell people then? If they say so.
I believe that psychology offers a lot in terms of improving your practice as well. So if you understand better how the brain works, how you work, how your body works, you can make your practice way more efficient. And then you have a huge advantage. You don't need to practice as much, or at least don't need to spend as much time directly with your instrument, for example. You can also engage in mental practice. And it's kind of strange that you would invest so many hours by yourself in honing your skills, but almost no time in improving your way to deal with pressure. So where do all these hours go when you go on stage and you cannot perform under pressure? This is a really important aspect. You need to be able to translate your hard work into this particular situation as well. And that's what psychology, or what like mental training, can offer to musicians.
Yes, and we in the professional field already, we are every day in this situation of being under pressure before an audience. And still very few institutions, I don't know, hire a psychologist or have some kind of support system for their musicians. Is there also some improvement happening? Do you see something there?
Yes, there is some improvement. I could name a few examples, but overall, I don't think it's been that institutionalized yet as well. So, for example, the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra has a great program for their musicians' well-being and performance. I think they established this 8 years ago. And they also realized that actually it's also a huge financial advantage to support their musicians in a holistic way. So this would really reduce their cost, for example, for support they need, like in medicine or like physiotherapy, if they really make sure that they immediately understand when a problem occurs, that they can prevent injury, that they can really work towards the musician's well-being. I think this is an excellent example, really, of an orchestra taking care of their musicians really from the start. So right after they join the orchestra, they get their first sessions, their performance coaching. So that's a great example. Many other orchestras don't have that yet. So I think this is something we can work towards, that really every musician gets this support in order to enable a sustainable career, because we do have long careers and we would like to be able to perform as long as possible.
Yes, and we hope that we can contribute a little bit to it with our academy in summer. Yeah. So you also teach motivational psychology in master level seminars. And what do you think is more crucial to a career? Is it having a lot of motivation or having a lot of discipline? What would you say is more important?
It's a very good question. And I think we need to just consider a little bit how we would define motivation. And maybe I'll tell you a little bit, or our listeners a little bit, about self-determination and self-determination theory. It's one of the most impactful and important theories in motivational psychology. And it says that we humans, all of us, have three basic needs. So we need autonomy, we need competence, and we need relatedness. And motivation can also be distinguished between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and even further into different regulatory styles. So when we talk about discipline, we could also talk about external regulation, when there's really pressure from the outside. For example, that your professor says you have to practice 6 hours a day. That happened to me when I first started studying. So that's a really strong external pressure. Then I would practice because I'm being told so. Then there is interjected regulation, where I have an internal pressure. Like, I just have this constant feeling that I need to practice and that I need to work. So in a way, you could say that these external styles, these extrinsic motivational styles, are related to discipline. It requires a lot of self-control to maintain our everyday practice pensum. But then there's also intrinsic motivation, and studies show that musicians and performing artists in general have much higher levels of intrinsic than extrinsic motivation. So they really enjoy what they're doing. They do it because they thrive in this artistic expression, because it gives them something meaningful. And the level before intrinsic motivation or regulation is that you acknowledge that what you're doing is part of your identity. So, like I said before, it's important to think about what is making you as a person, what is creating your identity. And so, as a musician, usually we have this great part of, I am a musician. This is what I'm doing. I'm proud of it. And this is also something that helps us to keep going. And finally, the last regulatory style is that you acknowledge that what you're doing has some benefits afterwards. And I think many of us also practice because we know that the outcome will make us happy, will satisfy us. And in that regard, you can also move from different regulatory styles. And very often it is a combination of all of them. So you might have a very strong intrinsic motivation because you really enjoy making music. You may also enjoy trying to solve different problems that occur when you're practicing, like, for example, technical difficulties. But at the same time, sometimes you might also need the external regulation that someone tells you what to do, or a kind of inner pressure or inner discipline so that you can keep going. So to sum up, I think the intrinsic motivation gives you the why. Why are you doing it? And the discipline and the external regulation can also help you to keep going when it gets tough.
Yeah, beautifully put. And where is then this line between discipline and trying to give our best, of course, and pushing ourselves to or over the limit of what is healthy? Can you tell us where this boundary is? How can we perceive it ourselves, if we're pushing too much or if it's still in a healthy, solution-oriented way?
I wish there was an easy answer, but I am looking for this boundary myself every day. Because I do think that when you're pushing your boundaries, you will sometimes go over the boundary and then notice that it was too much. And this is necessary to understand what you're capable of. And maybe these boundaries can be moved up every once in a while, so then you can try again and try harder. But I think if you notice over a longer period of time, like several days, several weeks, that you feel really exhausted, that you're no longer into what you're doing, into going to the rehearsal, into picking up your instrument to practice, then that could be a sign that you've pushed yourself too hard and that you need a break. But really, I think this is highly individual and requires constant curiosity about exploring yourself and understanding how you want to work and how you need to work in order to achieve your results. So just being mindful about how you feel, about maybe also first signs of pain, and taking breaks when it's really too much. But of course, in order to expand, we sometimes need to push.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about pain and the body, on your website, we can read that your approach is also embodiment oriented. So many of us, or some of us, might already have heard the word embodiment in the context of mental training, but what does it really mean for us to understand it?
It is really about the connection between mind and body, and also that our body can give us signs, so-called somatic markers, to indicate a certain feeling, or that maybe you would like to change something before you even know about it in a cognitive way. So in that sense, our body is really smart. And in coaching, embodiment also means that I work a lot with how the coachee or the person I work with reacts in a bodily way to how we work. So we use the knowledge of the body in our work, but it's also important to perceive, okay, when is there a bodily reaction to what we're doing? When does it feel right? So we do not need to always explain or make it possible to understand what we're doing, as long as it has a good embodiment, a good bodily reaction.
Yeah. And these days we often hear sometimes by the media that our body has its own memory system. We mostly hear about it in the context of stored trauma, and that the body reacts in a certain way after trauma. But can we also use this kind of bodily intelligence to our advantage? So, for example, for memorization, as you mentioned, is there something we can use that for?
Yeah, it's interesting. For memorization, I think it is important to understand that our main aim here is that we're automizing processes so that we don't need to implicitly control or even interfere. So we want to learn certain movements or melodies or music in a way that we can just let it go and kind of go with the flow. And in order to achieve that, I think it's important to understand that we have different levels of learning. So when we learn a new piece, it's still all very explicit knowledge that we need to put in. We need to think a lot about what we're doing. And over time, we reach a state that is more autonomous, and then finally a state that is more automatic. And what can help here, I think this is more on a cognitive level, is to set different cues for yourself. So different kind of signal words or feelings or emotions on these different levels that we create when we memorize a piece. And so the very first level is a kind of basic level, usually very technical, where you might need different cues about what movement is important, or like on the violin, which shift is important. And then the next level is more interpretive. So it's about the dynamics maybe, or certain phrasings. And again, finding different cues that can help you to kind of create different parts in this bigger piece of music that you're memorizing. And finally, the highest level is the performance level. And so here you're already thinking about, what character do I want? What do I need during the performance to think about, to be able to retrieve what I've just made automatic? Of course, this doesn't mean that I cannot have basic cues when I perform, but it's, I think, really useful to have this kind of framework of different layers that we go through when we memorize. And yeah, we've of course all heard of the term muscle memory. And I think that just really refers to having this automatic process where our fingers or our body already kind of knows what to do and how to move. And for a performance, we want to reach a state where this can just flow without our interference. And in order to make that to happen, I think it's really useful to have this kind of inner script with your cues, like what do you want to focus on, what can help you to retrieve what you've learned in the many hours before. And also kind of retrieving a certain bodily feeling that you encoded when you were practicing the piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. You already mentioned focus, because I think that that's a very important topic to talk about to you today. Because at the moment, I'm doing a series in the Penthesilea Facebook group that I call 100 Days of Focus, where I take the members on an everyday journey with me on what helps me focus and concentrate in my professional life. And it's based on the 100 days of practice many musicians put out there on social media. Could you maybe give us your top 3 tools for maximum focus?
Well, I have done quite a bit of research on attentional focus in musicians, and it's really interesting because they focus on so many different things when they play, and it's sometimes difficult to say what is the best thing to focus on. But I think from what we know from research so far, a really helpful tool is engaging in mindfulness. So whenever you can, and it doesn't have to be while you're practicing, becoming aware of the present moment, of the right now. And you can do that by maybe listening to your body, like doing a body scan, or just appreciating, perceiving what is in front of you, or what you're hearing, or what you're smelling, what you're sensing. You can engage every sense that you have. That, I think, is really the most important tool. The second most important tool is goal setting, I think. So goal setting can go down to a very detailed level in our practice as well. I think sometimes we might do it without even being aware. In sports psychology, we call these process goals. So really, what do we want to achieve in a particular moment when we play or practice? And defining such a process goal can help you to direct your attention and thus focus. So it can be like, this is the character that I would like to express right now. Or it can be, I want to play this particular passage at this particular speed. Or I'm going to work on the intonation just in these 3 bars. So very clearly defining beforehand what it is that I want to achieve. Maybe also understanding how I can evaluate afterwards whether I have achieved it can help you to direct your focus. And I think that is a very useful tool. You don't need to always write down your goals. It's more a way of thinking as well, like a very deliberate way of practicing. And the third tool, I think, is imagery. So in a way, this is also connected to what I just said when I talked about mindfulness, using all your senses. But imagery is not just mental practice, but meaning imagining what the music's supposed to sound like, but you can also visualize the character, a certain texture, a certain color. And by doing this and by training this, you will also find that you can improve your concentration and your focus.
Great. So those are also the focus points when you are already on stage, right? Coming back to your senses, staying in the imagery. What would you say? Is there one best focus point you would suggest? Is it more staying in your senses, or would you say more engaging your fantasy in this imagery, or what is it?
Well, from research, we know that it is generally better to have a so-called external focus. And that means that you're focusing more on the effect of your movement rather than the body movement itself. So that would suggest that it's not that beneficial to focus on a certain sensation in your body, because it kind of makes it risky that you might start questioning the movements that you have already automized. But that is also not a complete rule that you should always follow, because I also work with a technique called centering, where you focus on the center in your body to release tension and to have a focus point where you can direct your deep abdominal breathing to release tension and find the right state for your optimal performance. So that would mean that you could also return to this center of gravity in your body as a focus point, kind of to ground yourself when you've maybe start feeling a little insecure. I conducted a study with musicians where they described after performing what they were focusing on and thinking about. And most of them described that they were focusing on musical aspects. So I think in general, that is still the biggest part of our attentional focus when performing on stage. But there are also differences, like focusing just on technique, for example, was described as leading to a lack in character and expressiveness. So then it's important to find this balance. Sometimes I do need the attention because on the technical aspect, because there is a technical difficulty. Sometimes it can help me to not explicitly focus on that, but rather on what I want to express with it. So it's a complicated, a complicated area, because you cannot always maintain the focus on the same thing. You will have to shift whenever necessary. Sometimes you'll have to attend to maybe your accompaniment, like the pianist or the orchestra you're playing with. But having certain anchor points or certain cues, like I said before, or certain sensations in your body that you can return to when you notice, oh, I'm getting distracted, or I'm starting to think about losing confidence, then this can be quite useful.
Great. Oh, but sometimes, as I'm also working with students on audition training, people are so overflown with stress hormones that they don't even have or they feel they don't even have a conscious choice to where to put their focus on. So what are your top regulation tools you're using in your practice to help people come down to a state that they're then able to choose a focus point at all?
Right. So when this is still before going on stage, then we can use tapping techniques. So, for example, from process and embodiment focused psychology, we have this tapping technique that can be very easily learned and that very quickly regulates your arousal or your emotional discomfort. And this consists of just lightly tapping different points on your body and works through the receptors on your skin to downregulate your emotions. So this is something that really everyone can do very quickly. Another thing is focusing on your breathing. Now, there are many different breathing techniques, and at Penthesilea Academy, I think the participants will also learn a lot about that. So I won't talk too much about it now, but it's a really easy tool just to focus on a longer exhale than you inhale. Then very quickly you can downregulate yourself. And that is, again, something you can do before you walk on stage. When already on stage and you feel like you really don't have this capacity of like shutting down your negative, intrusive thoughts, I think something like this centering technique can be very useful, like focusing on an anchor in your body, on trying to find the stability, connecting with the ground, or going into the feeling of the music again, which sometimes sounds easier than it may feel in that very moment. I know I have experienced it myself. But when you have certain tools ready and you know what helps you personally, then you can practice it already during rehearsal, even during little practice run-throughs at home. And I know from my coaching practice that it's just useful to know that you have the tools. It can give you a lot of security to know, I have this. This is what I can do. This is what I could focus on if something happens. And then maybe you don't even need it. And then that's also fine. But to have this like safety anchor, I think can already take the anxiety away when you anticipate that you might have such a moment on stage. And then probably you'll be just fine.
Absolutely. It's like a toolbox that gives you a lot of confidence then.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you something. We often hear that, or I often heard in my studies that a certain level of nervousness is great for your performance because then you're in a more alert state and that helps you perform at your best. And then I've also read other publications, also of psychologists, that say, no, fear downregulates your performance in any case. Fear is bad. What do you say about it? What's your experience or your research?
Well, there's a lot of research and theories on anxiety and on the relationship between anxiety and performance. And one theory that I think has been rather dominant is that you need a kind of medium level of arousal in order to achieve your highest performance. But then there's also other approaches that consider cognitive and somatic anxiety. So whether you're quite worried about what you're doing, about the outcome, and the somatic symptoms of your anxiety, such as increased muscle tension or increased heart rate, the sweating, sometimes also individual symptoms depending on which instrument you play. And these theories would say that generally you should have very low cognitive anxiety, but a certain level of arousal is good for you because it mobilizes the energy that you need, like this increased concentration level that you need. And then there's also theories that say that there's a kind of individual zone of optimal functioning. So each person, each performer has their own best area in which they can perform best. So for some, this may mean that they need a rather high arousal level so that they can really access the resources that they need for their peak performance. And for others, it means that they need a rather relaxed state in order to be able to perform best. I think it's dangerous to say you shouldn't have fear and you shouldn't be anxious, because that already creates quite a bit of pressure that you're supposed to feel in a certain way, and that you should believe if you're feeling certain somatic symptoms, you will for sure be unable to perform. I think that is not the most helpful approach to this. I think if you acknowledge that what you're about to do is something special, it also is something meaningful, and it comes with a certain level of arousal, and kind of accepting that this is a different feeling than just sitting at home on the couch. This already will enable you to deal better with your symptoms. So really, like your inner acceptance of certain symptoms that you might experience, and this heightened arousal that I think is quite likely to occur when you're about to go on stage for an important performance. That being said, there are different self-regulatory tools depending on which state you're in and what you might need or desire. So it can happen that you're so tired, so exhausted, maybe from a lot of rehearsing and practicing, that before the performance you need something activating. That doesn't happen too often in my practice, but it does happen. And that is also okay, of course. But mostly people would like to downregulate their arousal and just have a bit more control. And with that, you can use the tapping, the breathing, the centering, and you can work in the long term with a lot of different mental preparation strategies so that you will feel that you're ready to perform, even though you might also notice that your heart is beating faster and that maybe you're feeling a bit more activated than usual.
Yeah. You said a word that I want to come back to, and that is the word outcome. Because mostly in an audition, we're there for the outcome. It's not that we're playing a concert and some people like it and some people not, and it's not so important, but it's about our existence. It's about earning money and making a living with our music. So my students find it really hard to let go of an outcome in this situation. So Is there any advice you can give students on that? Because of course it's better to let go of the outcome to reduce the pressure, but how do we do that?
I like the idea that you should focus on what you personally can control, and you can control your own performance and the way you personally evaluate it afterwards. And you indeed cannot control how the jury will evaluate you and whether they think that you should win this position. But to prepare and then perform in a way that you're satisfied with yourself and with what you have done and achieved, I think is very, very important. And to come back to this idea of setting different goals for yourself, an outcome goal, meaning winning a position, winning an audition, can be extremely motivating, can be very powerful. Like as a goal to know this is why I get up very early every day to practice many hours a day. It's quite useful. Then when it is about what you focus on when you're there on the audition day, it's more useful to think about your performance goals and your process goals. So performance goal means what is your own standard? What do you want to achieve? What is it, like we said earlier, what is it that is a good performance for me? And the process goals can be from moment to moment. So what is it that I want to show, that I want to express, that I want to feel while I'm playing? And already integrating that into your preparation process over many weeks will also train you to stay focused on these aspects rather than on the outcome of winning the position, which I think is only harmful if it takes away your concentration and maybe your confidence while you're playing. So that's why you need something else to focus on and define more about what is the process about and what is it that makes me as an individual musician like artistic and capable and competent.
Yeah. And is there a difference when people come to your practice if you're working with them on an audition or a concert? I mean, the setting is different, but is there also a different approach for you to work with them?
Yeah, I think often people do have different goals or wishes when they want to work on audition preparation rather than improving their concert experience. I have the impression that often when it's about concerts, it's more about finding this joy again and really finding the flow, finding the enjoyment of being on stage. And audition preparation is indeed a lot about my own performance level and how I can really show in 2 or 3 minutes what I'm capable of doing. But then when it is about building confidence and improving focus, there are many similar aspects, I would say.
Yeah. And in your work, you don't only place your focus on performance and audition situations, but also on how to find a balanced and fulfilled life as a musician or as a high performer in general. What would you say is the number one cause that throws people off balance and leads them into physical or even mental illness? Is there a main cause in this profession of being a classical musician that leads there?
I think it's strongly connected to losing your sense of why you're doing it and for whom you're actually performing. And I think it often also has to do with your daily routines and not having considered enough what you personally, individually need to maintain your level of well-being, also in terms of health, in terms of exercising, sleep, food, that you're still able to perform at your best level. So once you've kind of passed a point where you realize that you're no longer able to maintain this level of performance and just feel tired and exhausted, it's really important to reestablish routines that can help you to regain your balance. And sometimes, of course, this can also mean to consider different choices in your career, like finding a different position or finding something else in your life that can act as a balance compared to the really strenuous lifestyle that you have as a classical musician. So I think it's, the lack of routines and the lack of your inner why and the awareness of where your intrinsic motivation can come from.
Yeah. Veronika, there's one question I ask each and every of my guests if he or she is a musician. And I'm really curious, what is your best or worst advice on auditioning you received or you gave?
Well, I received lots of advice on auditioning for sure.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah. I think that one of the best pieces of advice was to find my own way of structuring this situation, meaning, for example, that I would be very consistent with not talking with anyone.
That's a good one.
That, looking back, that has influenced so many important audition situations in my life where I wished I had been just more consistent and listening to my own needs. Of course, it's a small circle in the end, so you might end up meeting the same people at different auditions, or you might even know each other from studying together or whatever, and just maybe finding already like a certain phrasing that is polite but firm and decisive, that this is what I need, I cannot talk with anyone, is something that I think is a very valuable piece of advice.
I absolutely agree. I spent most of my audition times in the bathroom, just on my own, because usually that's the only like safe space where you can be with your own. So yeah, I think that's great advice. And the worst piece of advice, share it.
Let me think for a moment. Oh yeah, I know what I want to share. It was really the day before an audition that a professor of mine said that there are two drawers, so to speak, like a metaphor. One drawer is the practice drawer and the kind of self-evaluative drawer, and the other one is the performance drawer. And I should just shut the practice drawer and make sure that I am in the right drawer for performance. And that just, it was so it was so distracting somehow thinking about that, because he'd only told me the day before the audition. And I felt like I didn't have access to the right drawer while I was performing. And it was just kind of a good idea packed in a bad frame and at the wrong point of time, because I do think that you need to practice different mindsets, like whether you're really working on a piece and you're very self-critical and very aware of your mistakes or the things you would like to improve, and then creating and really preparing a mindset that you can have on stage. But it's not that simple as just having one or the other drawer and closing the one that you need for practice, because it takes a lot of practice as well to establish these different mindsets. And yeah, I remember that was really not very helpful in the moment, but in the end, it helped me to understand what I needed to do better in the long term, but really in the long term. So just deciding right before I go on stage that I have a different drawer, I didn't find that very useful.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. And now we have some questions from our community that I would love to give to you now.
Yeah, great.
Let's see. What is the first one? Yeah, that's a good one. How can musicians recover from negative audition or concert experiences where they didn't perform at their usual level? What are the best ways to handle these setbacks constructively and in a way that leads to growth rather than discouragement?
That's a beautiful question. Really important also to consider the time after the performance and how to take good care of yourself then. Well, I hear that this performance is somewhat unusual because the person may know that they are able to perform better. So this, I think, is very important to make obvious and make accessible that it's just one performance that was not at the standard of what you were capable of doing. I think it's also important to analyze why and how your performance was not at the standard you wanted it to be. But being aware that you might sometimes have a bias towards attributing a failure or something that didn't go as you wanted, especially when you're so self-critical as a musician, to just your own competence and your own worth as a person. That is very dangerous. So when you analyze your performance in a way that maybe didn't go as you wanted, just consider all the different aspects that you can consider, also the circumstances, the environment, and the way you prepared for this performance. And there I also would be quite honest with myself, because understanding that I didn't use the right strategy to prepare and maybe wanting to improve that is not the same as saying I'm a bad person or I'm a bad musician. So this is just one thing that I think one should do. And then this idea of being self-compassionate, I think, is also quite useful. So one aspect of that is also mindfulness. And another aspect is that you can understand that you're part of a whole community and that other people in your situation would feel the same as you, and understanding that there's lot of commonalities with other musicians and feeling connected, maybe also talking about your experience, but really being kind to yourself about this experience. And it can also be useful to do a little imagery exercise when you walk off stage, really also to downregulate. So it could be something like in your mind traveling to a safe space, or traveling to a space where you'd like to leave behind this experience and look forward to what is coming next.
So, in other words, it's really important to not just push down this experience and say, I don't want to think about it. And you just push it away, because then it might rise up for the next time, right? So it's better to analyze it, go into it and think it through.
I mean, if you're not ready to do that right afterwards, that's perfectly fine, of course. That's also an aspect of self-compassion, I think, to then acknowledge that this is not what you need in the moment. But in terms of improving your future performances, I think it's important to analyze and just understand, as best you can, what led to this experience. And sometimes it can just be an exception. Sometimes you just have a bad day. That can also happen, of course. But maybe if you realize that it was something about your preparation that you might like to change, then it's good to, in a way, also be critical about that on a rather neutral level, without questioning your entire self-worth.
Yeah, the second question, I think, has also a lot to do with self-worth. What advice would you give to musicians who struggle with perfectionism and often feel dissatisfied with their performances, despite positive feedback from others?
Yeah, I mean, perfectionism is, I think, sometimes somewhat inherent in the way most of us are being socialized and trained as musicians. And I think it's important to understand difference between a somewhat healthy idea of a perfectionistic ideal and distinguishing that between from the perfectionistic concerns that lead to just overly stressing yourself and may impact your self-esteem. So I wouldn't entirely disregard the idea of perfection, but I would understand when it is healthy for me and when it is harmful to me. And the other aspect, of course, is that there's sometimes a discrepancy between how I see myself and how others perceive me. And I think as musicians, it's also, part of our lives to really appreciate compliments. So even if in the moment we don't feel like this was our very best performance, if we were able to elicit something positive in the people who listen to us, this is certainly something to appreciate. And I think something that we have to learn, really acknowledging positive feedback and thanking for it. And but just somehow understanding that it's possible to move someone or to impress someone, whatever it is, even though you yourself may not have had the best experience when you were on stage. So I'm not sure I would give any specific advice in terms of, don't be perfectionist or or completely letting go of that idea. But when you do get positive feedback and you feel like you're not quite able to take it yet, still like getting into a connection with the person who gave you the feedback, and maybe also writing it down and then considering with a bit more distance from the performance what you can take away from it. That would maybe be my piece of advice.
Thank you, Veronika. Thank you. We're at the end of our conversation. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm so much looking forward to this year's Penthesilea Academy to working with you. Thank you for your time, Veronika.
Thank you, Karin. I'm so looking forward to working with the Penthesilea Academy as well.
Thank you. See you very soon.
See you. Bye.